Right. Session 2, where we continue.
I want to add something and then let's have a discussion because I understand it's shaping up.
Yes.
People are itching to ask
Many questions.
I perhaps say something about straddle, which is not immediately obvious but important at the same time. So there's a straddle, long leg and short leg. Long leg usually means buying, and short leg usually means selling. However, there are alternatives which are important to keep in mind. Buying could mean to enter a commitment to buy. So it's not actual buying, just to make a commitment, such as buying a future contract where there's only a margin money payment, not the whole amount. This is possible. Or commitment to sell. These are alternatives. We still talk about a long leg where you enter a commitment to buy, and a short leg when you enter a commitment to sell. Still further, and still less obvious, is lifting a commitment. Could you finish my sentence or my phrase? Lifting a commitment
To sell.
to sell. You see? So the word buy is replaced by sell, but this is lifting. That's also a long leg. Very important. And please write it here. Lifting a commitment to buy is equivalent to a short leg. So let's keep that in mind, that the idea of a long leg is much wider than just a simple act of buying. The idea of short leg is much wider than a simple act of selling. So with this in mind, I am going to explain a two-legged straddle. And I do this by giving you an example. We have discussed the four-legged straddle, which is the prototype of all straddles. You have an initial straddle, which later on you have to lift or reverse, and that gives you the four legs. But even that can be done more generally, because in this case, the example we had, the initial long leg and the terminal short leg were in the same markets, and the same with the initial short leg and the terminal long leg. But there are examples, and later on we'll see examples of that type, where all four legs are in four different markets. So really the concept is very, very broad. But now I'm talking about the two-leg straddle, long and short. And the example I want to give you is the simple example we already considered, vertical straddle. The long leg is the input level of that vertical pipe of the producer, and the short leg is the output level, consumer. So we have the long leg is the input, and the short leg is the output of the producer, of consumer. Now, we reduce this to a four-leg straddle because, as I said, this is our prototype. Not this, but the four-leg. So we think of this, I repeat, there's a producer, there's a vertical pipe, the input and the output. And we introduce a four-leg straddle, which we say is an elaboration of this model, where two of the four legs are, I say, phantom legs. You will see what I mean. Phantom legs in quotation. So, number one is placing an order for X. X is just a symbol to introduce the input, a certain producer good which the producer feeds into his pipeline. And he has to place an order for this from his supplier, and that's a long leg, he's buying, right, long leg. And then he is taking an order for consumer good Y, which is coming out of the other end of the pipeline, the lower end, consumer good. And he's taking an order and that's selling. So that's what I call the initial straddle. Just like in the case of the four legs straddle. However, this is pretty final because these orders are firm orders. When he places an order, the price involved is committed. And when he takes an order, again a price is involved. So he is committed to sell at that price. And therefore, this is pretty final. In other words, the profitability of the two-leg straddle is already decided at this stage. And that's why we call it two-leg straddle, in spite of the fact that there are two phantom legs, and I'm spelling it out for you. He's taking delivery of X, and he is making delivery of Y. Well, why do I call it phantom leg? Well, because it goes without saying that this becomes an effectively completed transaction once not just the order is taken, but placed, or the order is taken, but deliveries have been made as well. So that's the phantom terminal straddle. If you don't like phantom, then you have to suggest a better term. I've been thinking about what term would describe it.
Implicit? Implicit?
Pseudo.
Implicit?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It's,
Pseudo.
I like phantom.
well, this is playing with words. The idea is that the important idea is that once these two steps are there, once these two legs are in place, we can decide profitability. We don't have to wait until the nitty-gritty, the actual deliveries are completed, because the straddle is already complete at this stage. And that's why we call it a two-legged straddle. Okay? But since we have this prototype of 4 legs, I find it useful and helpful to complete the picture by spelling out. Oh, you're making it explicit, okay? So it's implicit already here, but if you want to spell it out, if you want to make it explicit, then you describe these phantom legs, you see? And that is a very important straddle. Why? Because the whole process of production is based on this. Remember, it all started with a spread. And the hawk-eyed entrepreneur having the gift of seeing in the landscape of all spreads, a very complicated landscape it is, but he has the eye to see that there is a spread calling for action. And he sets up the production facilities. And so once he's set up, he will enter 2-legged straddles. And if you want to spell it out, that's what's happening. Very important to consider this in the production process. This is what's happening. Starting with the spread, entering this, and then of course the spread will respond. It could close, make it profitable, and as it does, as the spread closes, the profit opportunity is eroding. And if you are a good entrepreneur, if you are a good producer, then you are prepared for that. Because you know that through your very action and through the action of the competitors, this spread is going to disappear and no longer profitable. So then you have to do something about it, and this is what we are going to follow up. But just to complete the story, we also talk about 1-leg straddles. And to give you an example of that, I'm going to talk about 1-leg straddle. Think of a producer who is shopping around for input. So this 1 leg will be a long leg. because as a result, the producer might shift custom. He's been using an old input, and since his spread has been eroded through his own action and the action of the competition, he has to do something about it. And what he does is he tries to fiddle his long leg. He is looking for another long leg, which will be either cheaper or a better quality, so that he can come up with a modified product, still using the same production facilities, modified product which will restore the profitability of this original spread, which gave rise to this whole process, production process. And the thing is that once he hit on that new input, he entered a long leg, just one. But that already determined the profit. Because other things, we assume, stay the same. So with this improvement, he restored profitability and continues production. So that's an example of a one-legged straddle which the producer does in picking a new input. So if you want to complete the picture once more, then you consider the implications in terms of phantom legs. So this is the long leg, enter the long leg, and that's real, that's not phantom. He buys a new input. Call it X. Placing an order for X, which is the new input. He looked around and found an improvement, puts in placing an order for X. However, he has to cancel the original order. Remember, he was shifting custom, so he canceling the order for X.
Let's call the other X X1. Let's call the other X the new X X1.
Call it X1?
Yeah.
Okay. That was the old, and this is the new one. Then this is X2. All right. Now, he takes delivery of X, which is the new input. This is the old input. Well, okay. If you want to call it X1, I have no objection. Well, actually, it's simpler to call it Y, isn't it? It's the old Y. This is the old input, which he is replacing with X. Okay. Now he takes delivery of X, but then he has to take credit for the cancellation. Credit for canceling the order for Y. Now these three are phantom legs for various reasons, and I'm not going to go through the reasons, but it's useful to put the one-legged straddle into context, because then we reduce the whole thing to the same prototype, the four-leg straddle. Now you might ask, what about the one-leg straddle where you are modifying your short leg? Here we modify the long leg of the producer. The producer also has a short leg, which is his output of consumer goods. And the answer is yes, the same way. You could have another example where the one-leg straddle is, he makes with the same input basket, but makes a little modification for the output. There are lots of these, and some of them you might also call phantom, like Coca-Cola introduces Diet Coke or a Diet Coke, or some slight silly variation on the original thing, thrown at the consumer that this is the real thing now, they have come out with the real thing and you better go out and buy it. But some of them are phantom or fancy or artificial and gimmicks on the part of the producer to trick the consumer. Some of them are real. I have seen lots of these in the computer revolution, that they make real improvements in some slides, but very helpful in making the computer more user-friendly or something like that. I leave it to you to find examples of these happening. The important thing is that one single leg or modification of one single leg will restore profit or improve profitability, and therefore we call it one-leg straddle in spite of the possible phantom legs, because this change was decisive in making it more profitable. So we give the name 4, 2 or one-leg straddle to the straddle according as how many legs will have to be in place in order to decide the outcome, profitability. So I just wanted to add this to round up the picture, and now we open the floor to discussion.
So, questions?
No, we were anticipating a torrent of questions.
Keep going. You had a point about you were trying to make in the kitchen.
Yeah, so I've been rethinking it, but the question was, is there not a significant difference between, in this example, or let's say the two-leg example of the producer buys an input and simultaneously commits to selling an output to a customer, versus buying gold and selling silver, which is a speculation that maybe, hopefully, probably the price of gold is going to rise faster than the price of silver, or alternatively the price of gold is going to fall slower than the price of silver. That one is a speculation that you think the market is going to change and you have to wait, and the other is you're committing to both legs at a known price, and therefore it doesn't have that same kind of risk to it.
Well, I would say everything underneath the sun is speculation, because we don't know the future. If you pretend otherwise, you are a crook. There's no way for human beings to see the future. There's no way to know what the gold price tomorrow will be. So that's not the real distinction, whether it's a speculation or there's actually a machinery doing something. And the decisive thing to see in all this is how many steps it takes to come to the firm conclusion that now this was good, this was profitable, we have made the right thing. So I am not distinguishing between speculation on the gold price and the production. The question is, whether it's one leg, two legs, or four legs, which you have to enter actually into the markets to decide whether your action was profitable or not. Just ignore the other features, that there has to be a refinery or a mint to produce gold coins or this or that. That's all irrelevant. The relevant thing is that when you enter these market orders, would it decide the profitability, or there's still something to be done before you can conclude that your market action was profitable? I think that's the answer. I don't see any possibility for a good answer to your question. But please express your own.
No, I sounded a similar thing. I think that if you say that is the set of speculation, then that is the set of arbitrage, as it were. So I think that's just the best way of sort of phrasing it, really. You don't know anything. The whole of life is a speculation. But you can be erudite about it, though.
It's a fight against uncertainty, whether you're a speculator or a producer or even a consumer, because you buy a new product with high expectation, take it home, open the can and find that it's way worse than you ever had. This happens too. So there is uncertainty out there, and we are all in constant fight against it. And then we just have to make firm decisions. It could be a commitment to buy, commitment to sell, or liquidation of commitment to buy, commitment to sell. And out of these possibilities come a final result. And hopefully, if it's a good economic system, if it's a good financial system, then the outcome, the ultimate outcome, will be at a higher level of coordination. Disorder has been reduced and coordination has been promoted. Now, you can guess how we are going to answer the question, what about our own day and age? What about the great financial crisis? Unfortunately, our present economic setup, our present financial system is not conducive to this, because there are so many tricks which the governments, the banks, and other agents can do at the expense of the consuming public, and also the producing public. The producers are suffering, the real producers. Main Street is suffering. The consumers are certainly suffering, because we have a monetary system which allows that to pretend that it can play the role of positive value. But that is negative by its nature. There's no amount of talking around the fact that that is minus. It's negative. You cannot pretend that it can play the role of a positive value which can be used for measurement. There's just no way. It's contradiction in terms. And because of this, because the society, consumers and producers, labor, capital, everything is made subject to this imaginary world of positive values created out of negative values. All kinds of contradictions are being heaped on one another, and in other words, you are kicking the garbage upstairs to the attic, pretending that this can go on forever. And ultimately, all the garbage will come crashing down and burying the living things underneath garbage. And that is what is happening. So we are talking about an ideal world here, where people are working for the good of society, everybody. And even if they are not conscious, even if they are not making big vows that they are doing this, whether they admit it or not, they are helping the common good. They are producing. And even the consumer does it because the consumer has this one-legged, the prototype of the one-legged straddle, shifting custom. And in doing so, the consumer has a handle on the producer to answer the needs of society in the best possible way, coming up with cheaper goods and higher quality goods at the same price or lower price. And this is all for the betterment of the world. So if we had a proper monetary system, then this model would prevail. It would be very generally applicable. But it's unfortunate, we'll talk about this more later on, that in our present circumstances, this model is far away from reality. And, so this is it, and if you'd like to ask more questions, here we are, we'll try to answer them. I promise that I will circulate my notes for this particular lecture and also the coming ones. The coming one, this is fairly detailed, what I already have on arbitrage. But the future ones will be much shorter, and hopefully with the help of Rudy, we'll come out with a book. This is not a promise, but this is a plan we have decided to pursue, to fill in the details and come up with a volume. I don't know how long it will take. As I said, I don't want to make promises, but encouraged by Rudy's positive experience with publishing his book, Beyond Mises, of which you had an opportunity to buy or look at, we would like to come up with a version of this, and there will be a promotional price for all the participants who are here. The list price could be about $38, but we'll give it the half price deal to the
well, first of all, I'd like to, not right now, it's a bit early, but towards the end of this whole session, get some feedback. Who would be interested in that, in a book to accompany the DVDs? And that would give us an indication that yes, there's general interest. Yes, we want to have it. We want to have the written stuff, and if we're encouraged by that, I think we'll, why not?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I said, I told some of the guys who grabbed these books, I'd like to have, I really appreciate some feedback, and I'm going to put my own email up there. This is the website for the book, but I'll put, for these people here, I'll put my own personal email, and you can send me notes and say, what is this?
Is your email in the book itself?
This is in the book, beyondmises.com. It's not my email. I mean, if people, I don't want anybody to start emailing me, but you guys are trying to do that. Okay? If the book takes off and lots of people buy it, I probably won't be able to handle the volume of the emails.
Rudy, I wonder what the Mises Institute has to say about your title, Beyond Mises. There's nothing beyond
I'm
Mises.
sure we'll find out eventually.
I did suggest to Rudy the slightly less contentious title might leave him a bit more breathing space.
Well, we discussed this, and I said, no, this is what it is. The book name has to reflect what's in it. Otherwise it doesn't make sense. And if anybody wants to dispute that, that's fine. We're open to discussion on this. And Professor Fekete himself said, he's sitting up there, he says, they don't want to even talk about it or debate it. Okay? But if they do, fine.
Luckily they will attack you and they will make the advertisement for your book.
Sticks and stones can break my bones, but me will never hurt me.
So the cold water, please.
We're looking, actually, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Controversy sells. If this controversy hits the fan, everyone will want to read the book.
Thank you.
What is this all about? So yes, go, controversy.
So then I would like to put another kind of question to you. Do you want me to take you for some sightseeing? I thought especially for the castle area, which is to be seen, I think, maybe in the evening, and there is a fantastic view from the Gellért-hegy. And I also saw to the zoo, which is nicely embellished recently. So would you like?
That would be in the evening, Jordan?
Yeah.
If I have a little bit of time to get my,
Not to the zoo, but
The castle.
the castle, for instance, and
if I have a little time to get my wife, who's in bed,
yeah, of course,
like 5:30 or something.
of course, not today, but you would say when you would be.
On another evening than today?
Yeah, another-
Yes, yeah,
another
I'd be
evening.
interested.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, then which evening would you like? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, it's fine, yeah.
Judith, could you say a few words about the plans for excursions, especially for Saturday and Sunday? We could make a trip to the hill where
Yeah, okay. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So today you have me, so apologies for that. But Professor will interject whenever I make a mistake or anything needs clarification. So today we're going to be talking about the bid and the offer price, or the ask price, and the processes behind how you achieve the bid and the offer price. But before we do that, I just want to develop the concept that Professor was talking about yesterday in terms of all economic activity being a form of arbitrage. You can't assume the narrow definition that's given in all financial textbooks for arbitrage. It's a very narrow subset of the whole concept. So, a stock which has a quote on two different markets, for example, Unilever is quoted in New York and London. A difference in the bid in New York and the offer in London, that's the so-called risk-free trade, and that's what people normally associate with arbitrage. That's a very narrow subset of arbitrage. Arbitrage is the more general process of buying something and selling it, and with that you have the two legs which give the four-legged straddle. And it might be easier to think of what the professor was saying yesterday by assuming that everything is a four-legged straddle, except there are aspects of it which mean that you can't know all ends of it, as it were. So everything is a four-legged straddle. It's just a variation on that, that gives you the 1, 2, and the 1, 2, and 4 the professor was talking about yesterday. So, as an example, crude oil, 500-600 years ago, there was no use for crude oil. It was just a poisonous mess. No one knew that it had a higher calorific value than coal. Then someone realized that it did, and an engineering company who had foresight decided to buy the basket or the equipment of production of extraction of crude oil to sell into a market. The first person who realized that had this huge spread to take, because no one else was doing it. They saw that there was a potential market for crude oil, and they were the first to tackle it. What happens subsequently is that someone else sees the spread, and it's sufficiently high for them to again bid up the cost of production for crude oil and sell crude oil. And each time someone comes into that field of entrepreneurial endeavour of extracting crude oil, that spread contracts until that spread is deemed too small by the next person who's considering extracting crude oil, and he doesn't do it. So that's the spread that's available for anyone else that wishes to attack it if they can do it more productively or more efficiently or whatever. But the spread narrows, and that's the arbitrage mechanism in process. So crude oil, you can change crude oil to anything, any substance on planet Earth, and the point is still valid. So that was just a little summary of yesterday. So today it's the bid and the ask price. Now, as we all know, there is no such thing as a monolithic price. And the first person to realise that was Carl Menger. And it's not. The fact that there are two prices is not used in neoclassical economics in any way whatsoever. The way that neoclassical economics is done is they assume that there is always a price. There is always a price at which people are willing to bid and with which people are willing to offer. So that's obviously rubbish. In market turmoil, the bid just goes away, and all you have is an offer. So what they do is they say, well, to get around that, we'll assume there's a price. And this is neoclassical. And then if they think that it's not sufficiently highbrow, then they go, well, the bid and the offer is just price minus a little bit, and then price plus a little bit, and that solves the problem. It doesn't. That's just rubbish, basically. That's not that's not the way that the bid and the offer price is formed. But anyway, that's what they do, and it's just silly. So before we go into how these prices are formed, I'm going to give an example of an auction. Does everyone know what an auction is? Yeah.
Maybe you should define the term in this context.
Okay, any auction. So, let's say an auction for a ton of copper. Okay, so this could be like an auction room, and I'm looking to sell my copper, my ton of copper. So, what's the process? What's the process that happens? Someone comes up with a bid. Say Peter, he's willing to bid $1,000 for my copper. And then Rudy comes in and says, I'm willing to bid $1,200. And then so on and so on and so on, until, let's say Ludwig says, I'm willing to bid $1,800. And the bid for copper then stands at $1,800 for my 1 ton of copper. That is the bid price of copper at this auction, at that current moment. Now, what happens? If I'm the auctioneer, 1, 2, 3, put the hammer down, Ludwig's bid becomes my offer, and I have to close the deal. So that's one difference between an auction and a market, is that whatever the auction house, whatever the participants in the auction house, whatever their bid is, it will by law or by rule become what the good is offered at as soon as I put the hammer down. Okay, so what would happen if I brought another ton of copper to the auction house, and then another ton, and then another ton of copper, and then I kept on bringing more and more tons of copper to the auction house? What would you expect to happen to the bid price of copper? It would fall. Okay. It's quite easy. It's quite easy to see why. Let's say you all want copper. You're all willing to bid a certain level. Some people are willing to bid higher than other people, and obviously they get the copper. But the point is that if I keep on bringing copper to the market, I will eventually hit everyone's bid, because they all have a bid, and the bid will come down 1,800, 1,700, 1,600. So by the 1,000th ton auction, the bid will be substantially lower than when Ludwig was bidding at 1,800. So does everyone? That's quite a clear mechanism. It's quite easy to see. If you bring more of the same good to the market, that its bid price will fall. Okay? So we've done 500 auctions of that type, and we've realized that the bid price will fall. Okay. So another important point to mention, might seem obvious, but if you want to buy something, what must you wait for? You must wait for a seller, otherwise you can't buy. And if you want to sell something, what do you have to wait for? A buyer. Okay, just remember that. It might seem like a bit of a silly thing to remember, but it's important. So in the beginning, there was nothing, and now we're moving on to the general process here of forming the bid. So, in the beginning there was nothing, and then there was a bid. And people desired things, and they wanted things, and so they were willing to bid for things. And the bid was born. But that's not the whole story. Now, this might seem perverse, but it's actually the marginal producer that determines the price that he can sell at. Now, I know that if you think about that actually sounds it doesn't sound correct, but it is, And on the other flip side, it's the marginal consumer that determines the offer price, the ask price of the good. Now, there are usually lots of furrowed brows when we develop that, but I see no furrowed brows here. So I think everyone gets that, but I'll develop it a bit more. So, you have a bid. Let's say we're talking about copper again. And you have bids for copper. Okay. Okay, so the market opens, and people rush in, and the bid for copper from 7 different people. You arrange it monotonically increasing, and that's what you get. So someone's bidding 1,100, 1,200, 18, all the way up to 3,500. So what happens? If a producer wishes to sell, okay, they can only sell at a price that someone is willing to buy at, unless they wish to what? No, unless they wish to haggle. So if they're not happy with 3,500 dollars per ton for their copper, then they'll say, right, I'll put it at 4,000 here, and the market will stand at 3.5 to 4,000, but nothing being cleared. Okay, but this is not a luxury that most producers can afford. They can't afford for there to be a bid at the price that they're willing to offer their goods at. So what happens is that the producer augments this field, the field of bidders. Okay? One producer will come in, take that. Another producer will come in and take that. Another producer will come in and take that. All the way down until the marginal producer stops here. So they've taken 1,200, they've seen a downtick in the bid price, the next bid price is 1,100, and they refuse to sell because that price is not sufficiently high enough for them. And we'll go into that concept a bit later. So what happens is the producers come in, there is a bid, the bid is drawn down by the producers. And the reluctance of the marginal producer to sell into the next downtick determines the market bid. So it's the marginal producer and his reluctance to sell that determines the bid price that you see. So in this case, after all of this has been done, you will see that the bid price of copper is now 1,100. Is that clear? That all clear? Good, okay.
So you are in effect saying that even if there is no auction, there is an auction somewhere in the background, because that's just the mechanics of how the price is being formed.
Exactly. I'm not saying that, this is this is the process that happens behind which you see that price. Okay, the bid price. When you go and look for your quote on copper, on COMEX, for the near-term month, the bid price that you see is the result of that.
So it could be all in the mind.
Yeah.
Not physically.
Absolutely. This is not. I'm not saying that this is a tangible, physical thing that's going on. It can be all in the mind. So it's the process of thought, that goes on here. Okay. So again, you see that the producer has the tendency to pull the bid down, push the bid down. Push the bid down. Okay? What determines their reluctance to sell? Well, it's to do with their marginal profitability. Okay? So, is that all clear, really?
This plays out in time, obviously, and those prices are already off the board, and it started up there, and as you're saying, it's being affected, and then some other effect will cut in. So it's a dynamic process that you're trying to take, not a snapshot, but a series of slices.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, And again, I'm just talking about, in this example, the marginal producer, and this is static. The field of the producer and the field of those that are bidding is constantly changing, yet this process is still exactly the same. This might change in a split second to another set of bids. But the point is that at each moment, each slice, it's augmented in such a way that this is the valid explanation of the mechanism. But I'm simplifying it here. Okay? So, everyone is happy that the marginal producer, the producer of a good, determines the price at which they can sell at leisure. That everyone's happy with that. Yeah? Because in San Francisco there were a few questions about that, but good. Okay. So, let's draw that geometrically, just as an example. Okay.
Sandeep, you're basically saying that the marginal producer is determined the least amount of profit that's acceptable for the good that's being sold.
Otherwise they won't sell, or they can't sell, basically. So there we are, the producer coming in, augmenting the bid, pushing the bid down in that direction there. Okay, so everyone should be able to figure out now how you about how the mechanics behind the offer price. But there is not a symmetry in terms of objectivity and subjectivity. That is asymmetrical, and we'll go into that. We'll go into that in a minute. Okay. So, in a similar vein, forget about that side for the moment. The exchange opens again, and there are people who are offering copper. Now, someone is offering copper for sale at, let's say, $6,000, $5,500, all the way down to, let's say, $3,000. Now, who determines the ask price? The marginal consumer, the marginal buyer. So curiously enough, it's the marginal consumer, the marginal buyer, that determines the price at which they can buy. Which is perverse, but it's true. I remember Keith and I had a discussion about this, but you
just had like an offhand, half of a sentence in one of your letters that just sort of mentioned, and I was like, is this a typo? And you said, no. I was like, okay, well, you want to describe what you mean, and then...
So people will come in, the consumer will come in, the purchaser will come to the exchange, and he or she will take that. They'll say, okay, I'll take the 3,000, and so on. The consumer will come in until that point where the marginal consumer has a reluctance to purchase. And the marginal consumer's reluctance to purchase is determined by marginal what? Determined by marginal utility. So his reluctance is determined by marginal profitability, and his reluctance is determined by marginal utility.
Yeah, is this one of those areas where there's asymmetry?
Yeah.
That the marginal producer may be driven by other things, such as margin calls on his credit.
Exactly.
He could have all kinds of pressures to sell below cost because he has to, for whatever reason. The wolf is at the door, or he's about to close the plant and retool for something cheaper so he can start selling at a new price, anticipating that or whatever.
Exactly. The marginal producer, this part is much more objective than that part. Much more objective. If there is some kind of copper rush, then people attacking the offer and who keep on lifting it, that is a much more subjective thing than the poor marginal producer, who has to sell, who has to maintain cash flow, So this part is much more objective, more objective, and that's less objective.
Because profit is more objective than marginal utility.
It depends on cost. Cost is objective and
You
value
can,
is
you can
subjective.
count it exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is that the okay, let's just write marginal consumer to make it complete. Okay. So the marginal producer pulls the bid down by the reading.
Sorry, this would be more, if you're talking about consumer goods. If you're talking about producer goods, then both sides are fairly objective because,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Somebody buys bulk copper is going to...
Yeah, you're right.
But if it's a consumer good, then definitely...
This part is more. It's more different in consumer goods, than it is in producer goods. But it's still there, though, But it's more obvious in consumer goods, So, marginal producer pushing the bid down, marginal consumer pulling the offer up. So what happens is that all other things... Can I rub that off? Is that clear? Yeah. So all other things being equal, if the market was just left to that dynamic, okay, you would end up with that is what would happen to the bid-offer spread. Okay, it would just keep on widening indefinitely until a certain point. But it doesn't. It doesn't do that. But that is something that Peter is going to be talking about. That is something that Peter is going to be talking about tomorrow. So that is the principle behind the formation. The formation of the bid offer spread, and to put it in a little pictograph again. There you go. So is that all clear? Is that the mechanism clear? At each stage, it's at each stage it's not who you think is determining the price, And again, this is peculiar to our Hungarian school of thought.
Sandeep, sorry, I was writing. What does that signify? What you drew up?
This is just meant to be the consumer. It's just meant to be another. It's meant to be just another way of expressing the spread widening. So this is the consumer. Marginal consumer here. Marginal producer. Okay. So, are there any questions? No? Is that all clear? Okay. I think that what I wanted to get the professor to show was a proof, okay, about this concept of marginal profitability being the marginal producer's concern, and marginal utility being the marginal consumer's concern. Now, let me just make sure I say it correctly. Marginal utility must be higher than marginal profitability, otherwise no production would take place. And Professor, can I get you?
The upshot of that is that the ask price has to be higher than
Higher than the bid.
Can you visualize a situation when the bid price is higher than the ask price?
No. No. Okay. So there you go. Now, it's not going to be the subject of this lecture series, but this whole process, as the professor has ably shown online, is the exact process that you should consider for the interest rate as well. There's no such thing as a monolithic interest rate either. There is a bid and there is an offer on the interest rate. Now, in the same way, we don't talk about producers and consumers in that context, but what we should realize is that this process applies for everything on the planet. You know, everything has two prices. You know, nothing has one price. My chairman said to me, if you go into Marks and Spencer and you buy a pair of socks, there's only one price. I said, no, there's the offer price. You know, you can bid £3 if they're offered at £4, but you'll never get your socks. You know, so there is always two prices. You know, but one might not be there for you to consider, as it were. So there are always two prices.
Well, I think, strictly speaking, this is true for commodities. When it comes to assets, I can point out one example where the ask price and bid price actually coincide. And this is the real bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, because this is an appreciating asset. Day after day after day, the value of the real bill is going up, and it gets closer and closer to the face value of the real bill, which it reaches on maturity.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's an increasing asset, after all, it takes time for you to turn around. You bought, turn around and want to sell. That takes time,
Yeah.
even though it's just a few minutes.
Yeah.
But that is sufficient for the real bill to
Yeah.
appreciate.
Yeah.
Now, the same is not true for bonds, because the bond value could fluctuate.
Mm-hmm.
But the real bill is a very special. We are coming to that. So I'm just saying that, because I think, Rudy, you brought this up
Yes.
many months ago, that how come that there are no two prices for real bills, ask price and bid price? And the reason is that it's an appreciating asset. But these are assets. When it comes to commodities, I think we are on very safe grounds to say that there are definitely two prices, ask and bid price, and a positive spread between the two.
Because if you rediscountable, you know, so if you want, you know, it's a constant process of rediscounting, you know, as such. So it's not really a buy and sell. So real bills, they're peculiar, again, in the sense that this, you know, a real bill is amortized by the turn of a good. And by turn of a good, I mean the sale of a good, you know. Whereas a bond is not amortized usually by the sale of whatever the money was used for. You know, if you take a mortgage is not liquidated by the sale of the house at the end of 30 years. It's liquidated by your earnings power, you know.
So if there was suddenly a question about the goods that were backing that bill. So let's say you go back to the mercantile era and the goods were on a ship, and suddenly everyone knew that some ships sank, they didn't know which ship. So now there was some question that maybe the goods had been destroyed or lost. Then suddenly the bid would be pulled way down, wouldn't it?
No, it's insured.
Hmm?
It's insured.
It's in.
Has to be
It has to be
insured.
fully insured.
The real bill assumes that there's full insurance coverage. If there is no insurance coverage, it's not a real bill. It has to be attached, stapled together, the real bill and the insurance document.
So in my example, if there was also a question about the viability of the insurer, so what you said earlier about market turmoil, the bid is pulled. So if let's say there was enough ships that sank that the insurer himself was now in question as to insolvency, and you didn't know about these particular goods, the bid would be withdrawn, and so you could suddenly have a temporary, very wide spread, right?
In what, real bills?
Yeah.
May I suggest that we should not get into real bills? This is not
Yeah.
our topic
Okay.
here. Well, there will be a chance to talk about real bills later during this course. But here, thank you very much. May I take over?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I would like to emphasize something which a little bit got lost. I liked your presentation and I commend you for it, and it was very clear. But the point of view which I'm trying to push here got lost a little bit. And that point is that the one monolithic price has been broken into two. So when you approach this subject through the bid-ask spread, that is shifting the ground back to the uniform idea of a price. But here at this stage, I want to emphasize the dichotomy, the two prices. And not only that there are two prices with a positive spread between them, but the forces which form these two prices are different. That's where the emphasis is. Because that shows that the whole approach of the neoclassical, or classical and neoclassical economics is misplaced, where they are looking for equilibrium. We just have to assume from start that there is no equilibrium and there is no convergence to equilibrium other than what we once realized, the two-ness of these two prices, and there is the bid-ask arbitrage, which is closing the spread. But there is no equilibrium in nature, so to speak. These are two different forces. The forces represented by the consumers, the forces represented by the producers. And it's a little bit paradoxical that even though the bid price, at the first glance, you might say, well, that's precisely the producers. They are going to dictate, because they are stating, the ask price.
Yeah.
The ask price. That is in the hands of the producers. They are the ones who offer, and they are going to name the ask price. And actually, if you look at the analysis, as you pointed out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this more, it turns out that the ask price is the result of a process where the consumer, or the marginal consumer, is the protagonist. And the producers will have to adjust their ask price to the market situation as represented by the consumers. The same for the bid price. When you hear bid price, oh, that's the business of the consumers. And then it turns out when you go through the analysis that it's just the opposite. The bid price is the result of a market process where the producers play a role, and in particular it's the marginal producer who plays the decisive role. So here I would like, at least here, and later on you take the view, sure, there's bid-ask spread, and that's going to give you a convergence, and even though the spread is always positive, but it will reach a minimal value, and from the point of view of society, it looks as if it was a single price. That's the impression you get. But at least here, we should realize the two different market processes which produce the bid-ask price, and only after we look at the shrinking bid-ask spread as a result of arbitrage. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of this. These two sheets which you had, one is formation of the ask price, the other, the formation of the bid price, is the result of weeks and weeks and months of a thinking process. I take full responsibility for this. I will tell you now that the italics part, it's the first paragraph of the formation of the ask price. I read it. You may find this a little bit esoteric, too dry, or...
Can I just have 2 minutes of battery will run out? In 2 minutes the battery will run out on the microphone.
Can we take a break or just wait for 1 minute? I'll change it.
Okay, change it.
I got a bunch of batteries.
But you need a mic too, right?
We used 2 so far.
Oh.
No, that's the microphone, and the receiver is on the camera.
But what I mean is, you need 2 of these, so when you want to switch, you just take one. So let me read this italic part in paragraph 1, lecture 4, formation of the ask price. I must confess, I'm very proud of that sentence, even though it may not appeal to every one of you, because actually it takes time for it to sink in. The ask price, A, of a consumer good X marks the point where the opportunity cost of buying an additional unit of X becomes critical to the marginal consumer. He is the first consumer to refuse to buy the uptick in the price of X, in view of his opportunity to buy a substitute, say, the consumer good X prime. Now, I know at the first blush it won't appeal to anybody, but I'm suggesting that this is something you may want to read 10 times to give it a chance to sink in. It's not because it's my baby, but I think this gives you a very condensed form of the whole process. And it also brings in the word opportunity cost. This is important because the consumer has a choice. and he will go only so far with the rising price. At one point he will say, enough is enough, no more, and then turns to an alternative. And that is the role of the marginal consumer. And that person changes, this puts an end to the process. So, and the same for the formation of the bid price. And if you put the two side by side and read one after the other, and again look at the first one, you will see the complementarity, but you will also see the two different forces which are playing out this whole drama of price formation. Still staying with the formation of the ask price, this sentence I've just read talks about consumers. Now these consumers, lots of them, all of them who are interested in buying X, actually doing horizontal arbitrage. That's the terminology I used yesterday. Horizontal arbitrage, there are consumer goods and there is possibility of substituting one with another. So the consumer has a choice. And they do take advantage of that choice. They are shifting their custom. That's the word I used yesterday. Consumers have the habit of shifting their custom. I just hate this tendency of firms bribing consumers for their loyalty. No, the word is not bribing. They are tying them. They are, in other words, let's take a common example, which in Hungary is not very common. The cable companies, cable TV, they offer you contracts, but you've got to pledge your loyalty to the company. You are not going to benefit unless you commit yourself for 2 years not to change. You see, I find this revolting. Because, I mean, they have to earn the loyalty, not to, I mean, who is loyal to whom? It's the consumer who's the ultimate judge of the performance of the company, or the quality and the price of the product. So what I'm trying to say is that the consumers have this power of deciding, and it's the marginal consumer. Now, you don't think of the marginal consumer as a person, but it's a role. It's a role, like in a drama. It's a role which could be filled by different actors. And in this situation, this is actually the case. The person of the marginal consumer may change from time to time. In a volatile market, it could change from minute to minute. In a calmer market, it would change maybe once a week or once a month, or even more rarely. The point is that it's not a person, not a fixed person. It's a variable person. So, keeping this in mind, that there is a horizontal arbitrage involved, and the marginal consumer is not a fixed person but a different person, you could describe this process in the following way. You simplify the picture a little bit by assuming that there is a person who will play the role of the marginal consumer, whereas we know that there isn't a single person. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that a single person does the job, playing the role of the marginal consumer. And then visualize him as a figure skater. This is all in here, but I want to elaborate on this a little bit because I think this is helpful. It did help me, and I have lectured on this elsewhere, and I found that my students were helped by this picture. So there's a skating rink, and the marginal consumer you visualize as a single person. For the sake of argument, we know this is not a single person, but for the sake of argument, visualize it. Now, the marginal consumer has two legs, a long leg and a short leg. He wouldn't be a very good figure skater if one of your legs was longer than the other. But for the sake of argument, let's just assume that this is the case. We have a figure skater with a long leg and a short leg. Okay. Now, the long leg is anchored to a point on the skating rink. Okay? And the short leg is x prime, and that's the moving leg. So the figure skater is doing all kinds of figures or tricks on the ice, moving only the short leg. And that short leg is tracing out all those x primes, the alternatives. He's trying to buy something. But before he buys, he is shopping around. He's looking at other alternatives. And that's the short leg, you see, which is moving. And when he traced out with his short leg all the alternatives, he could come to the conclusion that he wants X, wants to have X. But if the producers do not cooperate by setting the asked price at the right level, then he says, to hell with you, I am going to change my long leg now from X to X prime and start doing it again in a different position. You see? Now, this, you may say, is too far-fetched. I don't know, maybe. But it did help me, and that did help others, so try to see it that way, and it may help you as well. Next hour, what are we going to talk about? We will run out.
I was going to move on to, well, maybe Peter should move into the closing of the spread.
Well, I don't know if he's ready. He was scheduled for tomorrow.
Okay, I'll find something.
Okay. Now, since we started late, I want to add another 5 or 10 minutes. Let's do the same thing for the bid price, which can be dramatized in much the same way as I've dramatized the ask price, formation of the ask price on the skating rink. Here, it will be a ladder, as you will see. So I'm talking about now lecture 5, formation of the bid price. I read the italics. The bid price B of the consumer good X marks the point where the opportunity cost of selling an additional unit of X becomes critical to the marginal producer. The roles are changed, producer, consumer. He is the first producer to refuse to sell the downtick in the price of X in view of his opportunity to refuse to buy the producer good Y, which is his input in the production of X. So the protagonist of this drama here is the marginal producer. He has a production facility which we visualize as a pipeline. There's an input here. Producer goods or baskets of producer goods are fed in at the top, and at the bottom there's the output. This is now the level of consumer goods, and the output, which is either a single consumer good or a basket of different consumer goods. Now, the important thing is that the marginal producer goes again only so far in making allowances to the consumers who want to pay smaller amount for the same good. He will cooperate with them, he will go along and cut the price, but only so far. At one point he will say, enough is enough, we can't go any further, and then he withdraws. And another marginal producer could take over, who may accept this level or may make further allowances. Whatever the case is, the point is that the person of the marginal producer is not a fixed person, it's a variable person. At every moment of time, there may be a different marginal producer. But now, to visualize this, again, I will assume, for the sake of argument, that just one person plays that particular role of the marginal producer. And this is how we can do this visualization. So we simplify the picture by assuming we personify the marginal producer of X and imagine that he is climbing a ladder or can go up and down on a ladder. And again, he has two legs, but one of them is shorter than the other. And it is his short leg, which he anchors on one rung, is the word. Ladder has rungs, okay? So his short leg is fixed on one particular rung of the ladder. And with his long leg, he is testing other rungs. How secure they are they, will they carry his weight, and so on and so forth. So he is testing, and this long leg is, of course, the input of his production facility, the pipe, the vertical pipe, because he has a choice. He either uses Y, a certain producer good, or a slight variation of Y, call it Y prime, and see if he can make further allowances to the consumer by cutting prices, by choosing a cheaper substitute or a better quality substitute. So he is just testing the market for producers' goods in order to offer a possible price concession to the consumers. So that's how we visualize the formation of the bid price. The marginal producer is put on the spot. And he is going to influence the choice of the consumers who are competing for a certain product X by testing the producer's goods market. So I am very partial, I must confess. Please criticize me if you will, but I have given lots and lots and lots of thought to these two leaves which you have here, and that was many years ago, and in the meantime I've been trying to improve on it, and I found very little room I could, because you see, but think of the point. My point is that we are criticizing the equilibrium theory, which ignores all these possibilities. The consumer's figure skating with his short leg, and the marginal consumer is the figure skater, or the marginal producer with his long leg testing the rungs of the ladder. This is completely missing from the equilibrium analysis of the monolithic price formation. Completely missing. There is just no mention of possibility of variation or shopping around or whatever. But that is happening. The marginal consumer is shopping around, and the marginal producer is shopping around at a higher level. But out of this is coming the picture which we have, that there is a different ask price, different bid price, and the positive spread in between. Okay? So you'll have a chance to ask questions and criticize my pet theories after the coffee break. Thank you.
Okay, half an hour.
It turned out to be the formation of the bid price and formation of the ask price. Please, any questions, comments, criticism?
This company, I saw the best prices for air tickets.
It's like cheap seats.
Cheap tickets.
Cheap air.
Cheap air.
It's cheaper to fly from here to New Zealand than to North America. It's incredible. It's a long flight. It's about 18 hours. And there is a fuel stop somewhere, either Hong Kong or Singapore. Yeah.
Cheaper than going to Australia by any chance?
Cheaper to go to Australia? Well, it may be. It may be.
It's 950
So don't fly Qantas.
pounds from London to Sydney. 950 pounds return. Yeah.
So are we skating now? Or?
Okay.
That's half of what it used to be.
Really?
That is half of what it used to be.
Okay.
Questions, comments, criticism, please. Open debate.
Herr Fritsch.
This is a process that seems to be opening the spread, so I'd love to see the other side of it, how the spread will be used. I have some ideas, of course.
I emphasize criticism because, as you heard already, Rudy and I will come out with a printed version of that course. And
in the US or in Canada, then you could cooperate with them.
we could fill in more introductory material in the book than you have had here, but we have to rely on your criticism. So please, if you feel that you would like to have a little more introductory part, just say so, because we take note and then we'll come out with the book which will take this into consideration. Okay, thank you.
So, as Ruth said, the bid offer spread, it widens. It keeps on widening until you have, the reluctance on this side and the reluctance on that side, and it will keep on expanding until both of those have been hit. But that isn't the full story, and this is something that Peter is going to be talking about tomorrow. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but it's not the full story. You don't just have producers and consumers in certain markets. You have people who are called market makers. And a market maker is someone who is willing to buy and sell. So
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So take an example, but we're not referring to the we're referring to the asset market here. So does everyone know how a stock exchange developed? What was the stock exchange originally? It was a coffee house, and they were all coffee houses in central London, where people used to congregate, smoke and drink and talk about South Sea Company, East India Company, and whatnot. And the way that originated was that people would come into the coffee house, and buyers, as in those that wanted to buy, would be on one side. Those that wanted to sell would be on the other side. Now, the way that those people would have been postured, as it were, would have been exactly the mechanics that we've just described here. Okay, I'm not saying that people come in and then start augmenting each side bit. I'm saying the result of what the positions that they take would have been the result of this process. So that was all fine and dandy, and everybody liked that, and then a group of people came in who saw this widespread and said, well, I can better that. I will come in and I will be what is called a stock jobber. And a stock jobber was someone who said, if East India is quoted at 25, 35, as a result of this process, I'll come in as a jobber and quote 26.32. I'm willing to buy at 26 and I'm willing to sell at 32.
Simultaneously.
Exactly. And what would happen is, that would, let's say, call him jobber 1. Jobber 2 would come in and better the spread. He'd say 27.31. And he would be J2. And that would continue to JN, where the marginal jobber's reluctance to make a narrower spread would basically stop it. So, counteracting that expansion, you have the marginal jobber who's actually contracting it, And the next jobber would come in and say, well, I'm not going to bet at 28, 29, that's not enough of a margin for me.
So this is a good example to show that the person of the marginal jobber is not fixed.
Not fixed.
The marginal jobber is a role, and different people fill it in.
Different people fill it in. This JN could decide to go for a coffee at the other end of town, and then he's not the marginal jobber anymore. it will be Jn minus 1. So that constantly changes, you know. No individual jobber is always the marginal jobber. It's a role that's occupied by different jobbers. And as an aside, all of the sort of quasi-intellectual people of the day sort of said, what are these crude people coming in and quoting two prices? You know, I'm willing to buy at this price, I'm willing to sell at that price. They thought they were some kind of sort of nefarious characters, you know, who aren't actually there for the purpose of investment. Well, they're not. They're there to narrow the spread, you know, and narrowing the spread makes it's more efficient for all people in the coffee shop, you know, whether they realise it or not, you know. But they try to vilify these people, you know, saying, you know, they try to ban it as well. They try to ban the process of market making because they didn't understand the true dynamics of it. Now, these people were often nefarious and they graduated into the investment banks we see today, but that's an aside, okay? The function that they had was still very, very important.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have engaged in this being the next marginal jobber if they didn't see a profit.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, yeah.
So that still drives.
Oh yeah. Really.
So there's one question left. Why would his bid or offer be hit if the other ones are not? I mean, what changes?
Well, if someone was willing, if someone wanted to sell, you're not going to sell at a lower bid than you can do if the market maker is offering you a higher bid.
So this is depending on the dynamics
Yeah.
happening to actually close the deal.
Yeah.
The deal is closed at a price,
Yeah.
at instantaneous price.
They might get upset. The people who are haggling might get upset, you know, because someone is basically beating them to it in terms of what they're willing to bid, what they're willing to offer. But, you know, that's their problem, you know. That's their problem. It's not the jobber's problem. It's not the market's problem. It's not someone who walked into the coffee shop just then. It's not their problem. They're very happy with that situation, you know. But people who are potentially haggling, you know, let's say South Sea stock is offered at 500, you know, but there's someone who wants to offer it at 1100. And then and now a market maker comes in and is willing to offer it at 400. You know, the guy who's offering it at 1100 will say, well, why is he doing that? You know, he's a baddie.
I haven't been able to make up my mind whether I should call the marginal jobber figure skater or ladder climber, but perhaps he would be a figure flyer.
Yeah.
It's not confined to horizontal and vertical, but it's an asset market, which is fine, but okay.
Louis?
It seems to me that jobber's role there is to increase coordination.
Yeah.
Right. And would it be right or wrong to say that the investment banker's role today is to increase disorder?
Well, first of all I can say is that in the past, you know, 30 or 40, you know, the person that trained me before I went to university said, you know, we would be surprised back in the late 50s, you know, early 60s, you know, if ICI moved 6% for the year, you know, that would be amazing, you know, that kind of thing, you know. So I think you just have to realise that what they do now, you know, that aspect of an investment bank's business is a lot smaller than it used to be. You know, they still have to make a market, you know, but, you know, now they're sort of playing with the firm's equity capital, you know, in proprietary form,
Well,
which is causing disorder.
they abuse
it, yeah.
the fact that they are market makers
Yeah.
to engage in other
activities. Yeah.
Chinese firewall.
What we have now is nothing like the way it was meant to be. You know.
The jobber acts on his own risk. One has to probably say this as well, because there is also no arbitrage in the narrow sense involved, because there's no riskless profit to earn, I guess.
This isn't riskless profit, you know, because he could just have one end attacked of his and he's left uncovered, you know. And it's not often the case that it's the same jobber who's quoting you the prices. They're probably different jobbers. You know, you have to think about the set of jobbers, and you have to think about, jobber 1, jobber 2, like that, and then the actual spread is the best of, you know, that end, and it's the best of that end. So that jobber is actually jobber 1, that. So the marginal jobber can actually be, who's quoting the prices, could actually be 2 different people, you know. So it makes it even more complicated, you know, as it were. You know.
I would prefer if you keep it to 1 and say, in a second they change role.
Yeah.
I think the marginal jobber has to be a unique person, maybe just for a second.
Fraction, yeah.
No, but has to be unique.
Okay.
I mean, this is splitting hairs.
Yes, but I like that very much, because it's a philosophical argument. Almost,
That's right.
We're all in a drama here, and we engage in human action, and we have roles to play, and the roles, there is a role, but different people take that role at different times. I like very much that.
But what is his added value? Does he have superior information, or is he just actually betting on to get rid of the stock which he may perhaps bid for and overpay the other guys?
His motivation is just narrowing the bid-offer spread, you know. I mean, if
it has to move so that he can profit, because if it stands still...
Well, no, he has to get hit, you know. Ideally, if he gets hit at both ends, then he's making the spread. He's making the spread.
He does not have to move.
Well, this business,
you can do it simultaneously.
this business also takes capital. I mean, it's not just walking in and using your intuition and start trading. He has to have capital. So in other words, he has to balance cost and benefit. And
he has to have an inventory of the stock that he's willing to make a market in. He has to have cash as well, you know, and it's not just as simple as walking into the coffee shop and narrowing the spread. But,
I think it makes sense, because clearly the larger the spread is, the more profitable the job is. And he's not out there to reduce it. He's out there hoping that it's big, but it's very activity reducing, which is the countervailing force to the other one.
2 things: the wider spread and the more volatile market, which makes the jobber's job
and the larger
more profitable. But if the spread narrows and the market becomes very calm, then the jobbers have a difficult time.
I'd be interested in the bid price finding being more objective than the ask price finding being more subjective. If you could, like, say the bid price has therefore higher priority, if you could subtract anything from that?
Well, it does, in the sense that you don't care what something is offered at, really. You care what the market is willing to pay for it, you know. I mean, when I started in finance, I always used to quote the offer price, you know, of any stock I was talking about, you know, because that's the price you buy at. And then I was told off by the head trader, who said you should always quote the bid price in a report, you know, even if you're looking to buy the stock. And the reason is because the bid is the most objective part of it, you know. You want to know what the market will be willing to pay for your position, not what someone is willing to offer it for. You know, the Mona Lisa might be offered for $200 billion, you know, but that doesn't mean that that's what it's worth, as it were, on the bid, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably additionally, I think it's probably for the book, it's helpful for when you say the bid is found by the marginal producer, which is kind of counterintuitive. If you turn it around, if the bid was found by the consumer, he doesn't want to pay anything.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I don't think many producers would be happy with that, though. there's always an
This is kind of the intuitive. This is not counterintuitive, right? So it makes it a little more intuitive.
You know, you have to have people who want something. You know, there has to be a bid there. You know, people wanted gold 10,000 years ago for some reason. You know, so the producer set about attacking that and augmenting whatever they were willing to bid for that. You know, but only up to a point, and their reluctance determines that point.
I want to call attention to a different point. When you're talking about the marginal producer is driven by his concern to make a profit, I don't think he intended to say that basically the market is going to guarantee all producers cost plus.
No.
That there are other forces, liquidity, credit. You know, if it's a mining operation, they have all this vast amount of capital, and they have to turn a certain amount of ore every day.
It's never cost plus. No.
It may actually benefit them to sell it at a 0.01% loss. It may be better than to just let it pile up in the warehouse, depending on what their credit conditions are, depending on what, you know, warehouse space. That there may be a lot of other things that make that a little bit less objective than simply their cost.
Yeah, I mean the way that I meant to phrase it was that their reluctance is set by some marginal profitability measure. You know, so they're not going to, but that profit could be negative though. You know, it's that's what determines their reluctance. You know, it could be above their cost base. It might not be. You know, cost base doesn't determine the bid on the market. You know, that's like saying that the cost of production determines the price. You know,
I guess the asymmetry is if you're the producer and you have 10,000 tons of copper, you don't have any choices to go horizontally arbitrage that. You have that copper position. The only choice you have is to sell it or continue to hoard it. Whereas the consumer has all kinds of choices, including to not do anything.
But you made a mistake as a copper producer if you allowed your inventory against declining marginal utility, because the copper producer must be very much aware that there is such a thing as market saturation, right?
I think what happens today is it takes years to get approvals and permits. So people are trying to plan copper demand 10 years out. And by the time they get there, they may find that demand has decreased, and they have a big problem.
what would happen is that if the bid on the market went substantially above profitability, then the cost of production is bid higher. But then when you look at all economic commentary, they assume that the price is going higher because the cost of production is going up, you know, when it's actually the other way around.
Right.
Well, there are no more questions. We close and come back at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.